Hello again and welcome to ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons. I'm your host. I'm glad you're tuning in. I have a guest with me today. As I had said in the past, I'm going to start showcasing some of the candidates running for municipal offices in this November's election. There's a lot of really great people running for both mayor, alderman, and school committee. For those of you who think that, the tax cap shouldn't be overridden, or don't think that the alderman should violate the city charter, or if you'd like your taxes to not go up, or you'd like better education, you should probably tune in and see who these people are, because these are the people you want to pay attention to, because they'll probably be the best bet for your money. Joining me today is Jon Dipietro. Jon is from Ward 6, which is over on the east side, and he is running for school committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is your first run for public office in Manchester,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what triggered this?
Well, I almost ran 2 years ago.
That's okay, because I've almost won.
I've lived in Manchester 25 years. I've got 4 daughters. They spent a total of 30 years in the Manchester School District. I have kind of a passion for education. I'm an electrical engineer.
So you're analytical.
I'm analytical. I spent a lot of time in school. I even taught for a few years at the college level.
Yep.
Just the previous school administration, I thought it was making my head explode.
Are you saying, when you say previous administration, do you mean before Superintendent
Before
Vargas?
Superintendent Vargas,
just
yes.
clarifying.
Those 3 years in particular got to be extremely frustrating. I saw the school district sliding backwards in a lot of different ways, making what I thought were really bad decisions, both financially and educationally, right? And so, when it came around for this year's election, nobody else was stepping up, and I just said, well, we can't have that.
Just can't ignore it anymore, can you?
So.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm kind of in the same boat. I've been here probably about the same amount of time that you've been here, and I've helped other people get elected aldermen in my ward, and now nobody was really interested in doing it again, and I was like, well, I guess this is the time. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes we need a little extra nudge because nobody else will do it. Yeah. So it's interesting for me because I don't have children, but I obviously pay for the schools in Manchester,
right.
And I don't begrudge that. I don't mind paying for a portion of the schools. We could have a big, long debate about whether I think I should have to pay as much as I do, if there should be a better mechanism where parents pay more than non-parents. Or, there's all sorts of debates, but the ones that are on the table are what we have to work with.
Right.
We have, from what I can tell, and you might have better information, over the years, and I think it's kind of plateaued, but we lost significant numbers of students in the past couple decades,
right.
Mostly because high schools built, Bedford built their own school. Other communities have pulled back on some of their students and so on. And for those of you watching who don't know, those were tuition students, so those sending towns would pay
right.
the city of Manchester for
right.
us to educate their children.
Right. So a couple things. First of all, I hear that a lot when I'm going door to door and talking to people or calling people. Well, when I tell them I'm running for school board, well, I don't have any children in the school system, and I asked them, well, you pay taxes, right? I said, yeah. And I said, well, 60% of them go to the school district. Right. So it has far-reaching effects. I think right now it's pretty clear that the Manchester School District doesn't have a great reputation in the state. No. And I think some of that's deserved. I think a lot of it isn't. I think a lot of it is the result of certain constituencies and certain politicians constantly bad-mouthing the schools in order to further their agenda, right?
Because if you tell everybody that the schools
great.
Are terrible, right? If you tell them everything's great, then they're not going to need more money,
right?
They're not gonna, But if we tell them, and nobody seems to ever think it through, because I'm in the same boat. I have no problem investing in our schools because I do understand that that's the future of we need to educate our kids. We have a social responsibility to educate our kids. Do I think we have to offer everything under the sun, maybe not, but I do get that we have to, we need to be turning out kids with decent educations.
Yeah.
But I don't know that every time when my taxes go up and the school budget goes up and up and up, because it goes up every year whether we decline in students or not.
Right.
I don't know what we're changing.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to ever change.
Well, they're changing now, and just to address your point about the students and the declining enrollment. Yes, most of that is driven from the fact that those sending towns aren't sending kids anymore. But you look across it. It's a trend across the state and across the country. School enrollments are down.
Right.
People are waiting longer to get married. They're having fewer kids.
True.
So there just aren't as many kids around. If you look across the state, student enrollments are down, I want to say 10%.
Which is a hefty number of kids.
Right. I mean, they're down much more significantly in Manchester. 11 years ago we had just over 17,000 students, and now we have just under 14,000.
Right.
So
that's 3,000 students, and a lot of them are at the high school level.
Right.
I like I said, I don't have kids, so I don't feel the personal impact.
Yeah.
I saw an article, I think it was over this weekend, talking about enrollment numbers in the grade schools and how they had kind of leveled them off just by shifting a little. And none of the numbers looked scary to me. It wasn't like I was like, holy cow, you've got, all those kids in one classroom. So it kind of seems like we've got the classroom size a little bit better under control.
Yeah, I mean, that's another perfect example of things getting blown a little bit out of proportion. Now, when I say that, if you're a parent of one of these kids,
right,
and I was one, by the way,
who happened to be in one of the schools that maybe had too many fifth graders or something.
Right. Well, this was actually in Memorial High School, right? So one of my daughters, this was going back a few years ago, in I think it was her biology class. They were literally they could not fit enough desks in the classroom for all of the kids. But the thing is, that's rare.
Right.
When you hear people go before the school board, and a lot of the people that I was referring to, the politicians and whatnot, they'll take a couple of examples of classes that are,
they make
are too
it sound
big.
like the whole school district is.
I mean, the problem in the way that it's one of the issues that I'm running on is the way I put it is inconsistent classroom sizes, because I will also say that same daughter at Memorial that I was just referring to, she just graduated this past year, and she didn't have a single class her senior year with more than 15 kids in it. She had 2 with single digits. And one of them had like 8 or 9, and one of them I think had 5 or 6 kids in it.
Which is crazy, because that's at a very expensive class. We might as well send them to the community college for that price.
Right. So we've got a situation where our high schools are literally half empty. They are literally half empty right now in terms of space. And our elementary schools, we have enough space, but it's a little crowded. Yeah, it's definitely not perfectly allocated. That's the thing is we have enough resources in this city. We have enough teachers and we have enough space. The problem is they're not in the right places. Right. And that's why we have these inconsistent class sizes where in some cases we've got too many kids in classes, and in some cases we have way too few.
Right.
We've got, I hate to keep picking. I just use this one example over and over again. It sounds like I'm picking on it, but it's just one that I happen to know of, and it's level 4 German. There's like one kid in each high school taking this class, and there's one teacher at each school. And
again, always saying I don't have kids, so I don't always know. But if we've got kids in Manchester that want level 4 German, I mean, we're not talking about basic German, level 4 German. Isn't it possible anyways that rather than having a teacher in a physical classroom, that we couldn't just hook them up with like an online course for level 4 German? I mean, we have Southern New Hampshire University right in the city. They teach people all over the world at the college level. I'm sure we could probably figure something out.
Well, that's a great point. But even better than that, Mayor Gatsis, I think it was 7 years ago, he went out and worked with local businesses to secure a donation of remote classroom technology so that, as an example, they could hold one German class in
one
West,
school, and all the kids could
and it would be broadcast to the other high schools at the same time. They have had this equipment for, I might be wrong, but it's been
years,
many years,
and we're not using it.
No, we're still not using it.
And I would think that would apply for a lot of things. I mean, most of your courses aren't hands-on. I mean, biology is.
Right.
You know, the arts are.
Right.
Music is. Math isn't really something it might be a little harder for some students, but maybe, I mean, by the time you're in 11th grade, the teachers know which students are going to be able to, they should know
Yeah.
which students are going to be able to sit in a classroom with a projector versus having to have a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I am not by any means a fan of technology in the classroom. I'm very old school, which is interesting because I'm a computer geek.
Right.
Every dime I've earned in my life since I turned 18 years old has been at the end of a keyboard. So I'm a huge technology buff, but it's all been self-taught.
Right.
And so I just think it's laughable when we talk about, oh, we've got to teach these kids how to use device. Have you ever seen a 4-year-old with an iPad?
Right. You don't really need to teach them.
No, and if you did, if you have a technology course for a kid that is 10 years old or 12 years old, what's that technology going to be
We're
in
teaching,
10 years?
I was
it's
going to
be gone.
Right.
So, but to get to your point about distance learning, I think languages are a perfect example, in my opinion, of a course that can be delivered remotely and with technology, maybe even better than you can with a live teacher, because you
would have the best of. You could have the teacher wouldn't necessarily even have to be at West, or the teacher could be in Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm just saying, the way I look at it is if it costs, these aren't real numbers by any means, but if it costs $100 to do it with a live teacher in every single classroom, so $300 because we have 3 high schools, and we could do it with a even equally qualified or more qualified teacher via who knows where, maybe Germany for that German class, and it was $50 once, and all those same kids. All that does in my head is says that we just freed up $250 for things we need elsewhere that we can't get. I've looked at some of the recent school budgets. When people talk about, well, they don't buy books. No, we don't buy books. There's like this many dollars for books, which even in a technological age seems kind of crazy that we don't even buy books.
Yeah. There's been lots of studies that again, this gets back to the technology in the classroom. Lots of studies that show that doing things on a computer, your memory retention is not as good as if you write them down.
I would probably agree.
So, I would never, want to see us forego or replace too much with technology. But like I said, I think languages are a good example of where technology might actually do a better job because it's auditory and verbal, and the technology, they can speak to the computer, the computer can, give you feedback and things like that. Something like math, I think you...
it depends. It really depends on the level, and it depends on, in high school, we're not talking about a grade school where you have 16 kids in a classroom or 26 kids in a classroom and you're trying to break them up into segments. But if you've got 400 high school kids taking one level math course, for example, or English course, and then half of it is reading, I'm going to guess that a portion of them could do it remotely.
Right, and... the other thing is, it doesn't have to be an either or. Right? It can be a combination, a blend of, some online instruction, some classroom instruction. I was asked, I went to my interview with the MEA a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions they ask you is, in your opinion, what's the ideal class size? I said, or maybe they asked, what should be the maximum class size? And I said, there's no such thing. I said, first of all, I think it varies by grade.
Exactly.
Right? I think they should be smaller at the elementary level.
I agree.
I think they can be bigger at the high school level. So I think it varies by age and it varies by subject. Yep. I think some subjects require a lot more interaction with the teacher than others. And so it varies. My freshman year in college, I was sitting in a lecture hall with 150 of my closest friends, right?
Only one year after being in high school.
Right.
So suddenly it was okay.
Right. It was, it was a lecture with a lab.
I remember a high school geometry course. Actually, it was one of my favorite courses in high school, but we had I don't even know. There was probably 60 kids in our class. It was rows and rows on, like scaffolding. We had 2 teachers, which was interesting, and they switched off every other week so that nobody ever got bored with the class.
Yeah.
But it was fine. There were kids that struggled, but guess what? Those kids were going to struggle in any math class. They just weren't going to be the math students.
Yeah.
For the rest of us, it was at least kept it moving, and they got more for their dollar.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do to change the education system and the outcomes. That I'll give you an example. So I mentioned earlier I did some teaching, and the most recent was just for the last couple of years. I taught a marketing class at Bunker Hill Community College in Boston to some Danish exchange students. And they were all the equivalent, over here, they would have been seniors who had graduated and were going into college. So that's the age group we're talking about, roughly 18 years old. And, when I first started teaching the class, they advised me, they said, these kids, they teach very differently over there, so you need to be aware that the whole lecture thing doesn't work for them. So you need to make sure it's very interactive. You have to have a lot of exercises and whatnot. I said, okay, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way I work anyway. So I thought that I was delivering the material the way they had advised me, but it was a full year before one of the chaperones, actually, who was a teacher, actually pulled me aside and took the time to explain it to me. And what he told me is, over there, nothing lasts more than 20 minutes. Nothing. And it's all very carefully alternating between, they'll have a maximum of 20 minutes of instruction, and then they'll have like 20 minutes of group activity, a lot of round table type of stuff, and then maybe another 20 minutes of lecture, and then they'll have 20 minutes, and then they'll have a break, a 10 or 15 minute break where they must do some physical activity. Get up, walk around, do something, get the blood moving, and then and it's just all day long. It's these 20-minute rotations. Because they know, and we know, I used to do a lot of professional speaking, and I know.
I was going to say, after that long, nobody's listening anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's, your brain, I think it's like 7 minutes.
Right.
Where your attention span starts to wander, and you need to switch things up in order to hold people's attention. And so, they've determined that 20 minutes is the right increment. So those are the kinds of things that we could do. And what's happened is, so you mentioned earlier, nothing ever changes. Well, under Superintendent Vargas, things are starting to change. One of the big things that they've just done is adopted a district-wide assessment system and policy, which they did not have. It was very haphazard. Very inconsistent and basically unusable. And one of the earlier things that Dr. Vargas said when he first came in that made me instantly say, wow, this sounds like we got the right guy for the job. He said, he took a look at what was going on, and he said, it's immoral to be administering assessments to kids that don't inform our instruction. Which was the case.
Yep. It's nice to hear somebody in the administration say it.
I know, it was mind-blowing. So they put a committee together, teachers, principals, administrators, worked closely with the school board, and they've come up with a plan. And they all worked really well together, and it seems like they've come up with a good plan, so they're going to get rid of a lot of that instruction time. But prior to that, what had happened is, in the elementary levels, they were doing away with recess because they needed...
I had heard that.
Well, the reason they were doing it is they needed more time for these assessments.
Right, and meanwhile, the kids aren't, your friend, Victoria, and she used to say her kids would come home so frustrated that it would make her crazy, because you can't just have your, if the kids are frustrated because they don't feel like they're learning anything and they're not getting anything done, if those are kids feeling that way...
Yeah. And the teachers were frustrated too, because they're losing out on instruction time.
They're not able to actually achieve what they need, what they really should be achieving.
Right, exactly.
That's important.
Yeah.
So, tell me what else you're hearing out on the trail, because you're probably hearing things a little differently than I am because you're running for school committee.
Right.
What do you hear from the people when you talk to them?
So, I hear a lot of concern about class sizes.
Right.
But interestingly, there is very little appetite for redistricting.
Right.
Even though everybody seems to acknowledge that we have inconsistent class sizes, I think they're afraid of redistricting.
Right.
They're, because they've chosen.
Right. I picked a house with this school. I don't
Right.
want to take the chance that maybe if we redistrict, I might get shifted. But if all of our
Exactly.
schools were equally good,
Exactly.
why would it matter? We're worrying more about the building than about the quality of the
Right.
education.
Right. And it's hard to blame them, right?
Especially if you're, there's some neighborhoods, and not to, talk badly about any particular neighborhood, but you could be blocks within one,
Right.
you're by a $350,000 house and you're 3 blocks from, 100% rental property.
Right.
You bought the 350, you're paying the taxes, you're paying a lot of money on those houses, I get it,
Yeah.
You're
So
paying.
it's a legitimate concern, but we have to do it.
Right, I agree.
We have no choice.
I think there just has to be, I never feel like, and it's not just the school committee, I don't feel like the city, I never feel like there's starting to be, but there's a cohesive long-term plan.
Right.
People talk about master plans, and I'm like, I know Manchester probably has one, but I never hear somebody pull it out, like when the aldermen are talking about rezoning or whatever. There's this situation in Ward 8 where they want
Right.
to rezone. Well, what's it say in the master plan? Rarely do you hear somebody say, well, the master plan says X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people vote for that. It's not sexy. It's
Well,
not
right.
glitzy. It's very boring, and people don't vote for boring.
Right.
They vote for the immediate, emotional, problem solvers. And when you've got a 2-year term,
Yeah.
it's hard to think long term.
Yep.
It's hard to think beyond, all right, I've got a year to get
Yep.
stuff done, and then I have to
Yeah,
think about,
Should I? I know.
re-election.
I've told people. I said, trust me. I don't have all the answers. If I had all the answers, I'd be running for something bigger than, alderman in my ward. But I just think that we've got yourself, myself, a lot of good people who just have the wherewithal and have the fortitude and have the desire to try to make some positive changes for our community. And that's a big thing that I think people fail to recognize, is that we're talking about a community. We're not just talking about numbers on a piece of paper. It's not just about the dollars in a budget. It's about a community. You have, your ward has a neighborhood of people. That's who you're there to serve. I have a neighborhood of people. That's who I would be there to serve. Sometimes I think we get people elected who I'm not really sure who they're there to serve, but it doesn't seem to be the people in Manchester, and that's unfortunate.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I'm optimistic because of the leadership we have now in Dr. Vargas. I think he's exactly the right person for the job. He's getting pushback from some people on the board.
That's probably a good indicator.
He needs, in order to continue making some of the changes, like the assessment changes I was just talking about. They've done a grade realignment, and he's ready to tackle redistricting. And by the way, he did it in his previous job in Rochester.
Yeah, I have a friend who teaches in the greater Rochester area, and when he was one of the candidates, right away I went over, clicked on Facebook and said, so what do I need to know about this guy? And she said, oh, you'll like him. You'll just have a hard time understanding him. And first time I heard him speak, I thought, well, she was right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I want to get to a couple events that are coming up. So how can people contact you if they want more information about your campaign, or if they would like to help your campaign?
Sure. I have a website. It's jondipietro.com, jondipietro.com. And all the information's there. I have a blog there where I write about education issues. I just posted the results of a survey that I conducted over the last couple of months, where I asked people what their concerns were about the school district. So those results are all out there, plus all my issue positions, and the donate button is there too.
Donate button's always important. Well, that's great. Do you have an email address, phone number, anything like that you want to share?
Sure, it's Jon, Jon, at jondipietro.com.
Clever, very clever.
See how
Vote for him just
did that on
because he's got a
purpose.
clever email. Well, I am glad that you joined us, and I'm glad that I've gotten to know you better this year. I think you'll do quite well in Ward 6.
Thank you.
For
I'd like
those
to
of
think
you
so.
watching who don't know, I don't think you have a primary. I don't have a primary.
Yeah, I do.
You do have a primary.
Yes, there are.
Tuesday, September
19th.
19th. Make sure your ward is now voting
The
in a
polling
different
place moved. It's in McLaughlin Middle School.
Yep. So you're going to have to drive a little bit out of the way, but go over to McLaughlin Middle School, cast a vote for Jon Dipietro for school committee there in Ward 6, and then we'll vote again in November, which will be a ton of fun. Thank you. And I'm going to talk about a few
Thank you,
things
Tammy.
coming up. You're welcome. I'm glad that was a great interview. I wanted to just talk about some things coming up. Most of them are political, but that's okay because I'm kind of political. I do want to tell people that this weekend, the weekend of the 11th, I think it's the 11th, maybe it's the 9th. How about the 9th and 10th is the Hillsborough County Agricultural Fair out in New Boston. I realize that's not in Manchester, but it's in our county, and if you like country type fairs, this is a great one to go to. Also, not this coming weekend, but the weekend of the 15th is Glendy. I want to give everybody the heads up. Mark your calendars. If you like Greek food, Greek culture, Greek music, you're going to want to go over to Glendy. That's on the 15th, 16th, and 17th on Hanover Street. I have 3 Republican orientated events that I'd like to talk about. First, the September meeting of the Manchester Republican Committee will be on Monday, September 11th at 6 o'clock at Murphy's Tap Room. State Senator Andy Sanborn, who's running for Congress in CD1, will be coming and speaking. Again, that's September 11th, 6 o'clock, Murphy's Tap Room. Also, the Manchester GOP is hosting a victory kickoff event at my house at 166 Varney Street. That'll be on Saturday morning, September 23rd, which is the first Saturday after the primary when we'll know who all the candidates are. That'll start at 8:30, go to about 10, and then people can take their volunteers and go off and do some door knocking. Come on by, have a cup of coffee, meet your local candidates, meet some other Republicans, and so on. Both of the information on those events and the next event I'm going to mention to you can be found at manchestergop.com, or you could look on Facebook for Manchester Republican Committee, or you could just email me here at manchtalk@gmail.com, and I'll gladly send you the information. And the last event, which isn't coming up until October, but I wanted to reach out in case anybody was interested in being a sponsor, is the Manchester GOP is doing a business at breakfast event at Theo's Restaurant. That'll be on Tuesday, October 17th at 7:30 in the morning. Governor Chris Sununu will be our keynote speaker. Tickets for that are just $25, and there are sponsorships available. And so if you're a local business and you want to help Manchester candidates in this November's election, please, by all means, either go to manchestergop.com or email me here at manchtalk@gmail.com. That's all I've got for this week. Next week, I'll bring you 1 or 2 more candidates for the September and the November municipal elections. Until then, get out there, enjoy the rest of the week. I know it's supposed to be rainy, but, what are we going to do? It's September. I'll see you again next week. Bye.